Hello, dear viewers. Today, we bring you a story filled with emotions and surprises. A story that will surely take you from shock to tears, to renewed faith in kindness and the twists of fate. It all begins with an ordinary waitress who had nothing in her hands but a kind heart. One day, she quietly helped a disabled boy, never realizing that he was the son of a powerful billionaire. That small but heartfelt act opened the door to an incredible turning point, one the billionaire could not ignore. From that very moment, the waitress's life changed completely in ways no one could have imagined. What exactly happened? And what made the billionaire decide to change her life forever? Stay with us until the end to find out! And don't forget to subscribe to Jordan Pierce Stories so you won't miss any of our inspiring and unexpected stories. The small diner on the corner was nothing glamorous. The wooden tables were old, the tiled floor was scratched, and the air carried a strange mix of watery coffee and burnt toast. Yet it was the place Lan, a young waitress, depended on to survive day after day. She never complained, but her tired eyes and calloused hands told the story. That morning, a light drizzle fell outside. The diner was half empty, only a few scattered customers. Lan wiped down the tables, her mind wandering to the stack of bills waiting at home. Looks like instant noodles again this month, she sighed, chuckling bitterly to herself. Just then, the door swung open, bringing in a gust of damp, cold air. A well-dressed, middle-aged man walked in, the kind of man who clearly didn't belong in a shabby diner. He wore an expensive suit, a gleaming watch on his wrist, but his expression was distant, cold. What caught Lan's attention, however, wasn't him. It was the boy in the wheelchair beside him, about 10 years old, with bright yet sorrowful eyes, his trembling hands hinting at some illness. The man strode quickly to a table and sat down, leaving the boy awkwardly behind. The boy looked around, hope flashing in his eyes, only to fade when no one paid attention. Lan hesitated, a strange feeling rising inside her. They don't look like they come to places like this, she thought. When she saw the boy struggling to reach the menu, she hurried over. "Hi there, let me help you," she said gently, a warm smile spreading across her face. The boy looked up in surprise, his eyes lighting up as if he had finally found someone who truly saw him, not through him. Lan lowered the menu to his level and whispered, "What do you feel like eating? I can give you some suggestions." Meanwhile, the man, clearly his father, never lifted his eyes from his phone. His fingers tapped the screen, his expression sharp, as though the entire world revolved around the numbers displayed there. Lan glanced at him and shook her head slightly. A rich man too busy to notice his own son. Typical. A flicker of sarcasm passed through her mind, but she focused back on the boy. I want pancakes," the boy stammered softly. "But I'm not sure if I can eat them." His voice trembled with both shyness and hope. Lan didn't hesitate. "Of course you can. I'll make them extra delicious for you. Don't you worry." Those simple words drew out the boy's very first smile of the gloomy morning. A pure, innocent smile, carrying the kind of happiness he had been starved of for so long. And somehow, Lan's heart warmed in return. From the corner of his eye, the wealthy man glanced briefly at them, his expression unreadable. No one could have guessed it then, but in that moment, an invisible thread tied a humble waitress to a billionaire's family. A thread that would soon change everything. Lan hurried back to the kitchen, where old cook Tom was flipping something over the grill. He frowned when he saw her grinning as she called for a special order of pancakes. "Pancakes? In this dump, our specialty is burnt ones," Tom chuckled, half joking, half sarcastic. Lan nudged his elbow. "Come on, just make them good for once, will you? I'll buy you a real cup of coffee to make up for it. Something better than that dishwater you drink every morning." Tom raised an eyebrow. "So you're saying my coffee is trash, huh?" She laughed, then leaned closer and whispered, "It's for a kid. Poor thing. All he wants is a decent pancake." Tom's face softened. He didn't say a word, just nodded and quietly stirred the batter, tossing in some extra butter and a touch of vanilla. Somehow, the dingy diner suddenly felt warmer, all because of one plate of pancakes. While waiting, Lan glanced back at the boy. He sat quietly, eyes fixed on his father. The man still glued to his phone, as if nothing else in the world existed. Every so often the boy sighed, his trembling hand gripping the wheelchair armrest tightly. The sight made Lan's chest tighten. She brought the pancakes over, placing the plate gently in front of him. "Here we are, the best pancakes this diner has ever seen. I hope you'll like them." The boy's eyes lit up, his lips trembling. Thank you. He reached for the fork, but his hands shook too much, and the fork clattered onto the table, a sharp sound in the quiet air. The man frowned but didn't look up. Lan quickly picked it up and sat beside the boy. It's okay. Let me help you. I love pancakes too, so I know how to make them taste even better. The boy looked at her, eyes shimmering, almost afraid he was being a burden. Lan smiled gently. You know what they say? Pancakes taste best when you share them. How about this? I'll eat a bite and then you'll try one. Deal? He nodded. She cut a small piece, lifted it to him, and he took it slowly. His eyes lit up. It's so good. Just 2 simple words, yet they echoed in Lan's heart like a soft melody. She knew she had done something meaningful. Small, but enough to change a gloomy morning. Across the table, the father finally looked up. His eyes lingered on the scene. A humble waitress patiently feeding his son, while the boy laughed for the first time in months. For a fleeting moment, something flickered in his cold gaze, but he quickly buried it beneath his usual mask of indifference. Lan didn't notice, but in that instant, a seed had been planted. A seed that would grow into a decision powerful enough to change her life forever. The boy's soft laughter filled the diner, breaking through the dull air of weak coffee and clinking spoons. It was so gentle that Lan paused, just to savor it a little longer. A shy, awkward smile, yet so full of genuine gratitude. It's really good, the boy whispered again, his eyes sparkling as if afraid his words weren't enough to convey his joy. Lan chuckled. Then have some more. Today's pancakes are free, just for you. The boy's eyes widened. Really? Of course, but only on one condition. You have to promise to smile more. Fair deal? Lan winked. For a split second, the boy turned to his father, as though wanting to share his joy. But the man was still lost in his phone, brows furrowed at numbers instead of his son's smile. The light in the boy's eyes dimmed a little. Lan's chest tightened, so she raised her voice. Just enough for the father to hear. You know, they say a child's smile is more precious than gold. No one has the right to miss it. The man flinched, lifting his gaze with irritation. What did you just say? Lan smiled innocently. Oh, nothing. I just said pancakes taste better when shared with a smile. His frown deepened, ready to retort, but then his eyes landed on his son's rare smile. His lips pressed into a thin line, his gaze flickered with something unspoken. He looked back down at his phone, though much slower this time. Lan continued feeding the boy, slipping in light-hearted stories about the diner's regulars that made him giggle. Just yesterday, a customer swore I put extra sugar in his coffee. I told him, "No, sir, it's just that your life is already sweet enough." He blushed so hard he couldn't say another word. The boy burst into laughter, quickly covering his mouth as if afraid of being scolded. But this time, his father only glanced over, silent. And that silence wasn't as harsh as before. In that moment, Lan felt something shift. She was just a humble waitress, yet her kindness had given a boy a reason to smile, and made a billionaire finally lift his head to see his own son. The atmosphere in the diner shifted. The few scattered customers had begun glancing toward Lan and the boy. Some smiled, others nodded, as if witnessing something rare in the rush of everyday life. Lan barely noticed them. All her focus was on the child. After a few bites, he suddenly whispered, "Miss Lan, can I try one by myself?" His voice trembled with both shyness and excitement. "Of course. Just take it slow." "No need to rush," she encouraged. The boy's hands shook as he lifted the fork, poked a piece of pancake, and carefully brought it to his mouth. Success. The entire diner broke into soft, spontaneous applause, as though they had just witnessed a small miracle. Lan clapped the loudest. "See, you can do anything if you believe in yourself." The boy's face glowed with pride, while his father's expression darkened. Not with anger, but with something unfamiliar. Regret, guilt, even he couldn't tell. All he knew was that it had been far too long since he had seen his son smile so brightly. Suddenly, his phone rang. He answered sharply. "Yes, I'll sign the deal this afternoon." "No, it cannot be changed." He hung up, his face returning to its usual coldness. But when he looked back, his eyes met Lan's. Steady, unafraid, without flattery, just pure sincerity. Why do you help him so much?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Lan hesitated. then replied softly, "Because everyone deserves kindness, especially a child. He doesn't need money. He just needs someone who truly sees him." The man fell silent. No retort, no sarcasm. He simply looked at her for a long moment, as though wrestling with a question he wasn't ready to admit. Lan rose to clear the table. "I should get back to work. But take your time with the pancakes." "No one's going to steal them," she joked lightly. The boy's eyes followed her, full of trust, and in that instant, inside the heart of the powerful billionaire, a seed of change had finally taken root. He didn't yet realize it, but in just a few fleeting moments at a rundown diner, both his life and the waitress's were about to be changed forever. The next day, Lan returned to the diner as usual. She had tossed and turned all night, replaying the image of that boy's radiant smile in his wheelchair. In all her years as a waitress, she had met countless customers, rude ones, kind ones, those who never even looked her in the eye, but rarely had there been a moment that warmed her heart so deeply. As she scrubbed cups behind the counter, she murmured to herself, "I wonder if they'll come back today." Almost as if in answer, the door opened. A chill breeze swept in and Lan froze. The same man from yesterday, still in his sharp, expensive suit, stepped inside. But this time, he wasn't alone. Two assistants in perfectly tailored outfits followed him, and of course, the familiar wheelchair with the boy seated in it. The shabby diner went silent. "A billionaire? Returning here twice?" the regulars whispered among themselves. An old lady muttered, "He must be lost." A young man snickered, "Maybe he's here to buy the whole place." Lan steadied herself and approached. "Welcome back. What would you like today?" The man didn't answer right away. He pulled out a chair, sat down, and swept his cold gaze around the diner as though appraising something of little worth. Then he turned to Lan. "I'm not here to eat. I'm here to see you." The diner held its breath. Curious eyes turned toward them. Lan's heart pounded faster, but she managed a calm smile. "I'm here. What is it you want?" He tapped his fingers lightly on the table, his voice measured but commanding. "Yesterday, I saw you spend time with my son." He laughed. He hasn't laughed like that in months. "I want to know why you did it." Lan froze for a second. The diner seemed to fall completely silent. The boy in the wheelchair looked at her, his eyes shining with hope. She drew in a deep breath, then answered slowly, "Because I saw a child who needed someone to believe in him. That's all." The man said nothing, though something flickered in his gaze. Then unexpectedly he gave a dry chuckle. "Do you know? In my world, kindness usually brings nothing but trouble." Lan replied at once, her tone calm yet firm. "Maybe so, but at least it made a child happy. And that's enough." No one in the diner dared to exhale. The quiet showdown between a poor waitress and a powerful billionaire had just begun. And it was the kind of encounter that would change both of their lives forever. Before Lan could say another word, the man gestured to one of his assistants. The man immediately placed a sleek black leather case on the table and opened it. Inside lay a thick stack of cash and several documents embossed with the logo of a prestigious corporation. "This is my card." "My name is Richard Gray," he said slowly, his voice like drops of steel. "Perhaps you haven't heard of me, but in the world of finance, this name is anything but unknown." The diner buzzed. A real billionaire sitting here in this shabby diner talking to a waitress? Lan glanced at the money, then back at him, her brows knitting. "Excuse me, what exactly do you mean?" Richard laced his fingers together. "Yesterday you made my son laugh. I want to hire you. Your job will be simple. Stay by his side. Keep him happy. Make him laugh. Naturally, the pay will be more generous than you could ever imagine." Lan froze. The other customers whispered in awe. "She's being offered a job by a billionaire. That's like winning the lottery." But Lan's heartbeat quickened for another reason. She looked at the boy. His eyes shone with hope, but also with fear, as if worried he was nothing more than a commodity in his father's transaction. She took a breath and spoke, her voice steady but firm. "Mr. Gray, I didn't do it for money. I helped him because he needed to smile. I don't want kindness to become a contract." The diner fell utterly silent. Even the assistants gaped, as if they had never seen anyone refuse Richard Gray. Richard narrowed his eyes, the corner of his mouth curving into a challenging smile. "You think you can refuse me? Money can buy anything." Lan met his gaze, unwavering. "Maybe it can buy many things, but not sincerity." Her words sliced through the air like a blade, leaving the diner buzzing with shocked whispers. Richard Gray, the powerful billionaire, leaned back in his chair, silent. But for the first time, his eyes no longer seemed entirely cold. The diner's air grew heavy. Everyone waited to see how the billionaire would react after being publicly refused. Richard tapped his fingers on the table, each sharp thump echoing with icy precision. He stared at Lan as if trying to pierce right through her. You are unusual. Everyone else would grab this chance to change their life. Yet you reject it. I can't decide if you're foolish or brave. Lan didn't bow her head. She answered softly, there are things I want to keep for myself, like dignity, and I won't sell it. Not even to a billionaire. The diner buzzed with whispers. An old man in the corner chuckled. That waitress has guts. A young woman muttered, if it were me, I'd already be on my knees taking the money. Richard leaned back, his eyes a mix of irritation and intrigue. Then he turned to his son. Ethan, do you want her to be your friend? The boy's eyes widened in shock, then hope. I do. His voice was small, but firm. Lan's heart tightened. She knew her refusal wasn't just directed at Richard, but that it risked shaking Ethan's fragile little heart. He couldn't understand contracts and business. He only knew that for the first time, someone had treated him like a normal child. Lan crouched down, gently touching Ethan's shoulder. Hey, listen to me. With or without a contract, I can still be your friend. Friendship doesn't need signatures, right? Ethan's face lit up, a hesitant smile breaking through. The diner let out a soft, collective murmur, as if they had just witnessed something rare and beautiful. Richard sat silent, watching the scene unfold. Deep in his eyes flickered an emotion even he wasn't prepared for. He drew in a long breath, then said, you really aren't like anyone I've ever met. Lan smiled. Maybe that's because I'm just an ordinary waitress. But no one in the diner believed that anymore, because everyone could see it now. Between a cold billionaire and a lonely boy, it was the waitress who shone the brightest. The diner held its breath. Richard Gray, a name that made boardrooms tremble, now sat in silence across from a waitress. No one could believe their eyes. Richard rested his elbow on the table, his gaze drilling into Lan. You're right, friendship doesn't need a contract. But I am not a man who accepts the word no. I'm used to bending everything to my will. Lan tilted her head slightly, her eyes bright but fearless. Then today might just be an exception, because I'm not another number on your spreadsheet. A ripple of whispers ran through the diner. Someone muttered, she's actually challenging him. Richard's lips curved into a half smile, half snarl. You think I can't change your mind? I could make your life far better with one nod. Or I could make it much harder. The words dropped like a warning. The air grew heavy. Some customers lowered their heads, unwilling to watch. But Lan didn't flinch. She drew in a breath and spoke clearly. You can buy many things, but not my heart. I helped Ethan because I wanted to, not because you paid me. If that bothers you, you're free to leave. Gasps rippled through the diner. No one had ever dared to defy Richard Gray so openly. Richard stayed silent for a long time. His eyes burned, but deep within flickered something different. Anger mixed with respect. Finally, he stood abruptly. Very well. I'll wait and see how long your defiance lasts. He motioned for his assistants, then wheeled Ethan toward the door. But the boy looked back, his gaze clinging to Lan as if unwilling to let go. Lan raised her hand gently, smiling. We'll see each other again, little friend. The door shut, leaving the diner heavy with tension and awe. Everyone knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a storm. After Richard Gray left, the diner buzzed with whispers. Customers exchanged glances, some sneaking looks at Lan with a mix of admiration and fear. A waitress, standing up to a billionaire, refusing not only his money but his threats. It sounded like something out of a movie, yet it had just unfolded before their eyes. Lan tried to return to her duties, though her heart pounded wildly. As she scrubbed glasses, her hands trembled. What did I just do? Challenge a billionaire? That's insane, she muttered, then smirked bitterly to herself. But if I hadn't, I wouldn't be me anymore. That night, back in her shabby apartment, Lan sat at the table staring at a pile of bills. Rent, utilities, medication for her aging mother back home. For once in her life, just one nod to Richard could have erased all of it. But she sighed. No, if I traded my dignity for money, I'd lose far more than everything else. Meanwhile, in a gleaming skyscraper downtown, Richard Gray sat in his massive office. $1 million contracts lay across his desk. but his mind was elsewhere, haunted by the image of a humble waitress and her fiery eyes as she said, "You can't buy sincerity." Ethan sat nearby, still giggling as he remembered the pancake scene with Lan. "Dad, Miss Lan is really kind. I want to see her again." Richard looked up, staring at his son. His boy's eyes were brighter than he'd seen in years. It startled him. Genuine joy, something money had never managed to bring back, was shining there. He stayed silent. But in his mind, a strange decision was forming. He would test this waitress. He would find out if her kindness was real, or just another act. Richard Gray, a man who believed everything could be bought, suddenly found himself wanting to challenge something money could never touch, and he didn't yet realize that this choice would lead him down a path he had never imagined. The next morning, the diner was packed. Lan bustled from table to table, sweat beading on her forehead. She figured yesterday had just been a strange blip in her life, and today things would go back to normal. A waitress, a few tips, and an endless pile of bills. But life never walks in straight lines. Close to noon, just as she was serving a group of workers, the door opened again. This time it wasn't only Richard Gray and Ethan. They arrived with an entourage. 2 bodyguards in black suits, a glamorous woman who looked like a personal assistant, and even a journalist with a camera dangling at his side. The diner froze. It felt like a live TV drama had just crashed into the room. Lan stopped dead, nearly dropping the tray. "Oh my God, they actually came back." Richard entered, his face cold though his eyes carried something unreadable. Ethan, on the other hand, lit up the room. The moment he spotted Lan, he waved enthusiastically, beaming. "Miss Lan." Every head in the diner turned. A few customers even pulled out their phones, recording the scene like it was breaking news. Lan walked over awkwardly. "Hello, Mr. Gray. I didn't think you'd return." Richard pulled out the same chair as before and sat, folding his arms. "You said you didn't need contracts, didn't need money. Today I want to see if you'll stand by that," Lan frowned. "What do you mean?" Richard nodded to his assistant. The woman stepped forward, placing a file on the table. "This is an opportunity, a position with the Gray Foundation, working with children with disabilities. A proper contract, high salary, professional environment, and of course, Ethan would be one of those children." The whispers grew louder. This wasn't just cash thrown on the table. It was a respectable career path. Anyone would jump at it. But Lan stayed silent. She looked at Ethan, whose eyes gleamed with hope, then back at Richard, whose gaze challenged her, daring her to break. She took a deep breath. This answer would not only decide her fate, but also the fragile trust of a child. The diner felt like a courtroom, the silence heavy, the only sound the faint rustle of the papers on the table. Lan stared at the file, her hands trembling slightly. This wasn't a wad of cash shoved in her face like yesterday. This was a real opportunity, a respectable job. With the salary, she could pay off her debts, care for her mother, and escape her crumbling apartment. Ethan's eyes stayed locked on her, shining with hope. But beneath that, she caught a flicker of fear, as though he worried that if she signed, she would become someone entirely different. Lan gave a faint, sad smile. Then she lifted her head and met Richard's gaze. "Mr. Gray, thank you for the offer, but if this is just another test of my kindness, then my answer is the same as yesterday. I didn't help Ethan for a contract or money. I helped because I wanted to." The diner fell dead silent. A few customers nearly dropped their coffee cups. Someone whispered, "She refused again." Richard's lips curved, his fingers drumming on the table. "Do you realize you just turned down the kind of chance thousands would kill for?" Lan answered calmly, "I do, but you should also realize some things can only be dreamed of, never bought." Like a child's genuine smile, Ethan let out a small cheer, as if set free. That radiant smile bloomed again, lighting up the entire diner. Richard stayed silent, surprise and confusion flashing in his eyes. He was used to obedience, to unconditional yeses. Yet this small-town waitress had said no to him not once but twice, and strangely enough, instead of anger, he felt respect. "Very well," Richard said slowly, his voice low and heavy. "Keep your pride. But remember, the world out there is far harsher than you think. I'll be watching to see how long you can stand." Lan simply smiled. "Then let's both wait and see." And in that fleeting moment, everyone in the diner realized this wasn't just a chance encounter anymore. It was the beginning of a strange bond, that would change all of their lives. After Lan's firm response, the diner buzzed with murmurs. Some looked at her with admiration. Others shook their heads, thinking she was foolish to walk away from such a life-changing chance. Richard rose, his suit sharp, his expression cold as ever. He closed the file, handed it to his assistant, then fixed his gaze on Lan. "Very well, you've chosen the hardest path. But remember, not everyone makes it to the end." He turned to leave, bodyguards and aides following behind. But Ethan hesitated. He looked back, his voice pleading. "Miss Lan, you promise you'll still be my friend, right?" Lan froze. The diner held its breath. She stepped forward, gently resting her hand on his shoulder. "I promised, little one, and I never break my promises." Ethan's radiant smile shattered the tension, his small hand waving at her until the wheelchair disappeared out the door. Lan returned to her work, but deep down she knew her life had just entered a storm she wasn't ready for. The eyes of the diner's patrons still followed her, silently asking, can she really withstand the force of Richard Gray? Across town, inside a sleek limousine, Richard sat in silence. He stared out the window, replaying the image of Lan bending down to reassure his son. For the first time, a crack appeared in his icy composure. He exhaled softly, muttering to himself, "Sincerity. Does it truly exist out there?" And so, the game between a cold billionaire and an ordinary waitress had officially begun. In the days that followed, the little diner became the talk of the neighborhood. Word spread quickly. A waitress had stood up to a famous billionaire, even lecturing him in front of a crowd. Some regulars looked at Lan with admiration, dubbing her the Iron Girl, but others whispered criticism. What an idiot. She threw away the chance of a lifetime. Lan kept her head down, working as if she hadn't heard a thing. Yet deep inside, she knew her life would never be the same. Whether at the market or just walking down the street, curious stares followed her, along with intrusive questions. Did you really turn down millions? Who do you think you are to do that? She gave a faint smile and answered only, I just did what felt right. One evening, as Lan was washing dishes in the kitchen, the diner owner called her out. His face was tense. Lan, do you know what's spreading online right now? Lan blinked. What do you mean? He handed her his phone. On the screen was a headline. Waitress at Shabby Diner rejects $1 billion contract from Richard Gray. Beneath it were thousands of comments, some praising her bravery, others mocking. Just a publicity stunt. Lan froze, her heart racing. She had never imagined their encounter would explode like this. But what made her blood run cold wasn't the crowd online. It was the final line of the article. A spokesperson for Richard Gray declined to comment, only stating, Mr. Gray does not let matters slide easily. Lan set the phone down, unease rising in her chest. Before she could think further, the diner door burst open. A man in a black suit, clearly a bodyguard, strode inside. His gaze swept the room before settling on her. Miss Lan, he said in a deep, commanding voice. Mr. Richard Gray requests your presence. Right now, the diner went silent. Lan stood frozen, the rag slipping from her hands. The storm had truly arrived. Lan stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. The diner was silent, no one daring to speak. The diner owner tugged at her sleeve anxiously. Lan, be careful. With men like him, a single word can change your whole life. Lan drew in a deep breath, picked up the rag she had dropped, set it on the counter, then lifted her chin to face the bodyguard. All right, I'll go. A sleek black limousine waited outside, its polished surface gleaming against the shabby street. The door opened, revealing a luxurious interior, leather seats soft and gleaming like something out of a movie. The bodyguard gestured for her to step inside. Her chest tightened, but she didn't back away. The door shut behind her, sealing her off from the world outside. Across from her sat Richard Gray. He leaned back, eyes cold as ice, a glass of wine swirling in his hand. Beside him sat Ethan, his face lighting up at the sight of Lan, but quickly dimming again at the heavy tension in the air. Sit, Richard commanded evenly. Lan obeyed, forcing herself to remain calm. The car started, the city sliding past the tinted windows. Richard took a sip of wine, then set the glass down on the polished table between them. Do you know what's happening out there? The name Lan, the waitress who defied a billionaire, is plastered all over the internet. My image, my reputation, turned into a spectacle. Lan pressed her lips together. That wasn't my intention. I was only being true to myself. Richard's brow arched, his gaze sharp as a blade. And you expect me to believe an ordinary waitress can stand against a storm of public opinion all on her own? What are you hiding, Lan? The air inside the car grew suffocating. Ethan lifted his head and whispered softly, Dad, don't blame her. She's just kind. Richard glanced at his son, something flickering in his eyes, before turning back to Lan. Kindness? I don't believe in it. But if your kindness is real, then prove it to me, Lan frowned. Prove it? How? Richard's lips curved into a dangerous, challenging smile. Tomorrow, you'll come to my charity gala. The entire elite circle will be there. If you can stand your ground in front of all those powerful eyes, I'll believe you. But if not, you're nothing more than a fool chasing illusions. Lan's heart raced. This wasn't just an invitation. It was a wager, a brutal test. And she knew, from this moment on, there was no turning back. That night, Lan returned to her tiny apartment, her mind in turmoil. She collapsed onto the rickety bed, staring at the ceiling stained with damp patches. Richard's words echoed in her head. If you can hold your ground before hundreds of powerful eyes, I'll believe you. She let out a small laugh, tinged with bitterness. A shabby waitress at their glittering charity gala. How absurd! Her eyes drifted to the corner where a pile of bills still towered. For a fleeting moment, she imagined accepting, dressing in something glamorous, stepping into a world she did not belong to. But then Ethan's image appeared, his innocent smile, his hopeful gaze, and his trembling question. You promise you'll still be my friend, right? Lan closed her eyes. If I refuse, Ethan will be disappointed. If I accept, I may be mocked by the entire world. But at least, I won't abandon him. The next morning she stood before her meager wardrobe. Worn-out shirts, faded jeans, a few old dresses from the thrift market. She searched and searched, finally settling on a simple pale blue dress with loose threads. She sighed. So be it. I'm not going there to show off clothes. I'm going to keep a promise. Just then her landlady, an elderly woman who had always admired Lan's hard work, knocked on the door. Seeing Lan struggle, she asked gently. After hearing the story, she smiled and brought over an old chest. Inside was a modest but elegant black gown, slightly worn but still graceful. Child, I wore this when I was young. Now, I think you need it more than I do. Lan's throat tightened, her eyes shimmering with tears. She bowed her head in gratitude, her hands trembling as she touched the soft fabric. That evening, Lan stood before the mirror, transformed. No longer the weary waitress, but a strong woman ready to step into the greatest challenge of her life. That night, the city's most luxurious hotel glowed with lights. Outside the entrance, a line of supercars stretched down the street, while reporters swarmed, their camera flashes exploding like lightning across the night. Lan stood at a distance, wearing the simple black gown her landlady had given her. Her heart pounded, her hand clutching a cheap little purse. What am I even doing here? She asked herself. But then she remembered Ethan's smile, his hopeful eyes, and she drew in a deep breath. As she stepped onto the red carpet, the room seemed to pause for a heartbeat. Women in dazzling gowns and men in immaculate suits turned to look. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Who is she? She looks more like the catering staff than a guest. Wait, isn't that the waitress who refused Richard Gray? Cameras swung toward her, flashes blazing. The spotlight of the evening unexpectedly fell on the small, unassuming figure of Lan. At the far end of the hall, Richard Gray appeared, tall and imposing in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. He walked slowly, each step commanding the air. When his eyes met Lan's, the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Richard's lips curved in a half smile, part challenge, part curiosity. He extended his hand. Welcome, Lan. At last you came. Lan hesitated, then placed her trembling hand in his. In that instant, the stares, the whispers, the blinding flashes, all of it converged on one truth. A poor waitress had just walked into a world she did not belong to. But Lan's eyes shone brightly. She whispered, I didn't come here to prove myself to you. I came to keep my promise to Ethan. For a brief second, Richard was caught off guard. Then he chuckled softly. Interesting? Very interesting. And so, the charity gala, meant to be just another glittering evening, became the stage for a confrontation no one had anticipated. The grand ballroom sparkled, chandeliers glittering like a starry sky. Soft music floated through the air, champagne swirled in crystal glasses, and elegant laughter echoed from every corner. Lan walked slowly, every step feeling like it was under the scrutiny of 100 eyes. A few women in extravagant gowns glanced at her from head to toe, their looks half scorn, half curiosity. What on earth is she wearing? A gown. Looks like something rented from a thrift shop. I heard that's the waitress who dared defy Richard Gray. Just a stunt, obviously. The whispers reached Lan's ears, but she didn't falter. She lifted her chin and kept moving, heart pounding, but eyes clear. From across the room, Richard stood with folded arms, lips curved as though savouring the show. He wanted to see how long this small-town girl could stand among the wolves of high society. Just then, a group of business elites approached. At the front was a refined woman, champagne glass in hand, her voice sweet yet dripping with mockery. "Oh, isn't this the famous guest of the hour? The waitress who set the internet ablaze?" Lan smiled politely, replying, "Yes, though I'm afraid I'm not famous. I only did what I felt was right." The woman laughed, her tone sharp as glass. "Really? A waitress lecturing a billionaire? Sounds like a fairy tale, but let me tell you. In our world, the naive get crushed." Lan clenched her fist but kept her voice calm. "If being naive means believing in sincerity, then I suppose I'll accept being crushed." Her words left the group momentarily stunned. Some laughed mockingly, but others glanced at her with a flicker of surprise. From the distance, Ethan peeked out from behind his nanny, his eyes full of worry. He whispered softly, "Miss Lan, don't give up." Lan felt that gaze, and from the trust of a child she drew strength, standing taller, ready to face the storm closing in. The music in the ballroom lowered, as if signalling something important. The host walked onto the stage with a broad smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we are not only here to raise funds for charity, but to celebrate values of true meaning. And how extraordinary. Among us is the woman everyone has been talking about this week, the one who turned down Mr. Richard Gray's offer." The crowd erupted. Dozens of curious eyes turned toward Lan. Some chuckled, others sneered, and a few looked genuinely intrigued. Lan froze for a moment. She hadn't known she would be thrust into the spotlight like this. From across the room, Richard stood with folded arms, eyes narrowed in amusement. Clearly, this was his doing. The host beckoned. "Please, Miss Lan, come up and say a few words." Applause filled the hall, though mixed with sharp whispers that cut like knives. Lan drew in a deep breath and slowly walked to the stage. Under the blinding lights, she faced a sea of expectant faces. Suddenly, a mocking voice rang out from the audience. "What would a waitress know about values?" Laughter rippled through the hall. Lan faltered, her hands trembling slightly, but then her eyes found Ethan. He was watching her intently, lips silently forming the words, "You can do it." Lan gripped the microphone tightly, her heart pounding, and spoke clearly. "Yes, I am just a waitress, but my job has taught me one thing. Value doesn't lie in the money someone spends, but in the genuine smile we can bring to another person. Yesterday, I saw a child smile, and to me, that is the greatest treasure of all." The ballroom fell silent for a few moments. A few scoffs and chuckles lingered, but among them were thoughtful gazes, even hints of admiration. Down below, Richard Gray said nothing. He sipped his wine, the corner of his mouth curving slightly, as though he had just witnessed something he hadn't anticipated. Lan's words echoed through the ballroom, cutting through the glittering air like a blade. For a moment, silence held. Then the crowd began to murmur. Some scoffed. "Naive. Let's see how long she lasts in this world." But unexpectedly, applause broke out from the back of the room, at first scattered, then louder, building into a ripple that silenced the mockery. Ethan beamed, clapping the hardest of all, startling the guests around him. His eyes sparkled as he looked at her. "Miss Lan, you did it." Lan gave a small nod, confidence rising in her chest like a flame. Yet her triumph was short-lived. A man's voice cut through the hall cold as ice. "Fine words. But if value is just a smile, who pays for the hospitals? Who provides the medicine those children need?" The ballroom froze. The speaker was a well-known businessman, a major investor in Richard's foundation. He stepped forward, his gaze sharp, clearly intent on cornering Lan. "What can you do besides serve tables?" he sneered. Don't turn naivete into philosophy. It won't feed anyone. The crowd murmured in agreement, many nodding. The weight of the room tilted against her. Lan gripped the microphone, her hand tightening, her heart pounding like a drum. This was no longer just an impromptu speech. It was an open battle, and every eye in the room, including Richard Gray's, was fixed on her next words. Lan drew in a deep breath, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. The businessman folded his arms, smirking, ready to turn her into a public joke. But instead of trembling, Lan smiled. A calm, steady smile that made the room pause. "You're right," she began, her voice low but firm. "A smile doesn't pay hospital bills. A smile doesn't buy medicine. But tell me, can money do everything? If money comes without care, without empathy, what do those children really receive? Nothing more than a number in a ledger." The ballroom stirred uneasily. The man's face tightened, but Lan pressed on. "Yes, I'm a waitress, but every day I meet dozens, even hundreds of people. I see exhaustion, despair, and tiny sparks of joy. And I've learned this. Sometimes, the smallest gesture can lift a soul, giving them the strength to go on, to keep fighting. Money buys medicine, but love makes them believe they are worth saving." Silence fell like a curtain. Then, a single pair of hands clapped from the corner. Another followed, then more, growing louder. Ethan beamed, leaping to his feet, clapping with all his might. His innocence shattered the wall of skepticism in the hall. The businessman who had attacked Lan stayed silent, at a loss for words. Richard Gray raised an eyebrow, his eyes glinting with intrigue and surprise. He hadn't expected this small-town waitress to hold her ground so sharply. Lan bowed her head in thanks, her gaze unwavering. Deep inside, she knew this battle was only the beginning. The gala ended in a strange atmosphere. Half the guests left with astonished looks, the other half whispering about the waitress who dared challenge an entire ballroom. But everyone agreed on one thing. Lan was no longer a nobody. She stepped out of the hotel, breathing in the cool night air. Her heart was still racing from everything that had happened. She thought she could finally go home and close the chapter on a crazy day. But before the revolving door even shut behind her, a barrage of blinding flashes hit her face. "Miss Lan, did you really refuse Richard Gray's money? What's your connection to his son? Rumor has it you're stirring up scandal for fame. Is it true?" Dozens of reporters swarmed, microphones shoved at her. Lan stumbled back, overwhelmed. She had never faced anything like this. Suddenly, a strong hand pulled her aside. Richard Gray stepped in front of her, his towering frame blocking the flashes. His gaze swept the reporters like a blade, his voice deep and commanding. "Enough. Follow us again, and my lawyers will handle you." The reporters hesitated, but didn't dare push further. They stepped back, cameras still snapping furiously. Lan stared at Richard in shock. Why would you help me?" He didn't answer immediately. He glanced at her, the corner of his mouth curling faintly. "Don't get it wrong. I didn't do it for you. I won't let this circus tarnish my reputation. But..." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "Your answer tonight. It wasn't bad." Lan froze. For the first time, she sensed a crack in the icy walls surrounding Richard Gray. Yet at the same time, she knew a bigger storm was brewing, because the media would never let her go so easily. The next morning, as Lan opened the diner, she noticed several newspapers scattered on the doorstep. The front page screamed bold headlines. "Waitress stuns billionaire Richard Gray at charity gala. Who is the mysterious woman beside the tycoon's son? Scandal or modern fairy tale?" Lan froze. Below the headlines was her photo. In the simple black gown, her anxious face caught in the harsh glare of flashing cameras. Customers inside the diner began whispering. A middle-aged man laughed loudly. "Well, look at that. We're having breakfast with a celebrity now. When's your TV debut?" A young woman muttered to her friend. "She looks so plain. How is she suddenly famous? Must be a stunt." Lan pressed her lips together, forcing herself to ignore it, carrying trays as usual. But inside, fear coiled tighter. This was no longer just between her and Richard. Now the entire public was watching her, gossiping, judging, inventing stories. By the afternoon, her phone buzzed non-stop. Message after message from unknown numbers. "How much are you getting paid for this act? You're really Richard Gray's mistress, aren't you? Stop pretending to be innocent. Everyone knows you want fame." Her chest tightened with every word. Her hand shook as she set the phone aside, unable to look anymore. Just then, the diner door swung open. A woman in a tailored suit walked in, introducing herself as a reporter from a major TV network. She smiled politely, but her eyes were sharp, probing. "We'd like to interview you, Miss Lan. The public is very curious." "This is your chance to tell the truth." Lan froze. A chance? Or a trap? Meanwhile, in his towering office, Richard Gray held the morning paper in his hands. His gaze lingered on Lan's photo, his dark eyes filled with calculation. He murmured quietly, "Will you stand firm, or crumble under the weight of public opinion? I want to know the answer." Lan sat beneath the glare of studio lights, blinking as the cameras zoomed in. Her heart pounded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Across from her, the reporter smiled with professional sweetness, but her eyes were sharp as knives. "Miss Lan," the reporter began smoothly, "the whole city is talking about you, a waitress who dared to defy billionaire Richard Gray, then gave a speech at his charity gala. Some admire you, but others claim it was all an act. What do you say to that?" Lan inhaled deeply, steadying her voice. "I didn't stage anything. I only did what I felt was right. I can't fake a smile when my heart disagrees, and I can't accept money if it means betraying myself," the studio audience murmured. The reporter raised her brows, her smile tightening. "And what about the rumors regarding Mr. Gray's son, young Ethan? Are you using the child's sympathy to build your own image?" Gasps rippled through the room. Lan faltered for an instant, then straightened, her eyes blazing as she spoke firmly. "No, Ethan is not a tool. He is a person, and I care for him for who he is. If I wanted fame, there are easier ways. But I chose only one thing, to be honest with myself and with the people I truly respect." At that moment, the large screen behind her suddenly showed Ethan watching the live broadcast from home. The boy clapped happily, his eyes shining bright. The audience went silent for a heartbeat. Then applause broke out. Not everyone clapped, but enough to drown the earlier scoffs. In the corner of the studio, a man in a grey suit stood with arms folded, watching silently. No one seemed to know who he was, but his cold gaze sent a chill through Lan. Perhaps the truth was far more complicated than she realized. The applause was still echoing when the reporter's tone suddenly sharpened. She pulled out a stack of papers, holding them up for the cameras. "But Miss Lan, we've just received some documents. Here it states you have unpaid debts and even faced eviction threats from your landlord. So tell us, how could someone struggling like this possibly refuse a billionaire's money? Isn't it more likely this is all a performance for attention?" The studio erupted. Some audience members gasped. Others nodded knowingly as if the truth had been exposed. The cameras zoomed in on Lan's face, waiting for her reaction. Lan froze. She hadn't expected them to dig up her private struggles. Her chest tightened, her hand clutching the fabric of her dress. For a moment, the venomous whispers cut into her. "Knew it. She's fake. Of course she just wants fame. No one turns down millions." Lan drew in a long breath, then lifted her head. Her eyes glistened, but her voice rang clear across the studio. "Yes, I have debts. I live in a cheap apartment. I'm not wealthy, and sometimes I skip meals to send money to my mother. But that's exactly why I understand the value of kindness. If I sold my integrity for money, I'd be cheapening myself. I'd rather be poor and hold on to trust than rich and live a lie." The studio fell silent. A few reporters exchanged glances, surprised at her resolve. Backstage, the man in the grey suit smirked faintly, pulling out his phone to send a quick message. "She won't break easily. Time for Plan B." Meanwhile, in his distant office, Richard Gray watched the live broadcast. He sat motionless, his eyes glinting with both intrigue and respect. He murmured under his breath, "This girl, she really is different." The next morning, Lan woke with a heavy heart. She hadn't slept all night, her mind replaying the harsh lights of the studio and the piercing questions. Yet she told herself, "At least I didn't stay silent. At least I spoke the truth." But before she could leave her apartment, a loud knock rattled the door. When she opened it, a courier handed her a thick envelope. Stamped on the front, "Legal notice." Lan's hands trembled as she tore it open, her eyes widening. It was a court summons, accusing her of defamation and damaging the reputation of Richard Gray. What is this?" she whispered, her heart plummeting. The news spread like wildfire. Within hours, headlines blazed across every outlet. Lan, the famous waitress, sued by billionaire Richard Gray. The truth behind kindness, manipulation or victimhood. Customers at the diner now looked at Lan differently. Some pitied her, others sneered. The diner owner sighed heavily. "Lan, you need to be careful. This isn't small anymore. Lan sank into a chair, her head spinning. For a moment, she believed Richard truly wanted to destroy her. But then a thought struck her. No, this doesn't feel like him. He's cold, arrogant even, but not petty. Someone else is pulling strings. Just then, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared. If you want out of this lawsuit, meet me. I know the truth. A hidden friend. Lan froze, her eyes widening. Who was watching her, and why did they want to help? Elsewhere, in his luxurious office, Richard held the morning paper, his brow furrowing. He snapped at his assistant. I never ordered a lawsuit against her. Who's using my name? The room fell silent, and for the first time, Richard felt the weight of another powerful hand, one determined to turn this fight into a far more dangerous game. Lan sat on her bed, staring at the message. Her heart pounded wildly. Who could know this much? And why call themselves a hidden friend? She hesitated all afternoon, but finally decided to go. I can't just sit here and let the storm swallow me. At the very least, I need to know who's truly behind this. The next text came with an address. A small cafe on the outskirts of the city. That evening, Lan pulled on a thin coat and stepped into the nearly empty cafe. The bell above the door jingled softly as she entered. Dim yellow lights flickered, casting long shadows. In the far corner, a man sat waiting. He wore a long coat and a cap pulled low, hiding half his face. When Lan approached, he lifted his head slightly, revealing sharp, cold eyes. Miss Lan, he rasped. You came after all. Lan sat down, keeping her distance. Who are you, and why did you text me? The man chuckled dryly, sliding a thin file onto the table. I work inside the Grey organization, and I can tell you this. That lawsuit didn't come from Richard Grey. Someone else is pulling the strings, using his name to trap you. Lan's eyes widened. Who? Why target me? His lips curled bitterly, anger flashing in his eyes. An old business rival of Grey's. He wants to bring Richard down, and you're just the pawn. If you fall, Richard's reputation crumbles with you. Two birds, one stone, Lan shivered. Then why help me? What do you gain from this? The man leaned closer, voice dropping. Because I lost everything to that man. If you hold your ground, I'll have a chance to strike back. But remember, the next step will be far more dangerous. Lan stared at the file on the table, her heart torn between fear and resolve. She knew she had just stepped deeper into a game with no way back. Lan stared at the thin file on the table. Her fingers trembled as they touched the cover, as though it contained something that could change everything. The mysterious man folded his arms, watching her reaction closely. Go on, he said slowly. Open it, and you'll understand what you're stepping into. Lan swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and carefully opened the file. Inside were papers, contracts, printed emails, screenshots. Each word stabbed at her eyes. Smear campaign against Richard Grey. Operation The Waitress. Step by step. It was all detailed. Spreading rumors about Lan, fabricating a lawsuit, manipulating the media to make her the center of controversy. And the final goal, to destroy Richard Grey's reputation, painting him as a ruthless billionaire crushing a poor waitress. Lan's vision swam. She flipped to the next page and froze at the name scrawled at the bottom. Victor Hale. The name sent chills through her, though she had never heard it before. The mysterious man's voice hardened. He's Richard's old rival. Lost a massive deal to him years ago. Now he wants revenge, and you're just the pawn in his game. Lan clutched the file tighter, fear and anger surging together. She whispered, So all of this was never about me. I'm just bait. The man nodded, his eyes dark. Exactly. And if you're not careful, he'll crush you long before Richard ever feels the blow. Lan sat in silence, her gaze burning with resolve. For the first time, she understood she wasn't just protecting herself. She was standing in the middle of a war between giants. Lan sat in silence for a long time, her eyes fixed on the file. Each page weighed on her chest, making her breath uneven. Across from her, the mysterious man waited patiently. Now you see, he said darkly. The only way out is to walk away. Go back to your little diner. Pretend none of this ever happened. Otherwise, Victor Hale will crush you. He's got money, media, even the law on his side. Lan lifted her head, her eyes rimmed red, but burning with light. Walk away? Let him use me as bait, destroy Richard, and turn me into his shield. I can't, the man frowned. You don't understand, Lan. This isn't a game between a waitress and a billionaire. This is a war of monsters in the business world. You're no match for them. Lan inhaled deeply, her voice trembling yet firm. Maybe I'm no match, but I have something Victor Hale doesn't. The truth. I stood before a ballroom of power and didn't break. I can't run now, not when Ethan, and even Richard will be dragged into this dirty game. The man studied her, surprise flickering in his eyes. Then he let out a dry, almost mocking laugh. You're insane, but maybe that's why you're different. Fine, if you choose to fight, I'll help. But remember, the next step. There's no turning back. Lan clutched the file tighter, her heart pounding. In that moment, she knew she had made her choice, not to flee, but to walk straight into the storm. The news of Richard Gray suing Waitress Lan flooded every headline, splitting the public in two. Some mocked her, others quietly admired her courage. But only those inside knew the truth. The real mastermind wasn't Richard, but Victor Hale. Lan decided she couldn't run anymore. With the help of the mysterious man, she arranged a meeting. The location was a luxury hotel, where Victor Hale was hosting a private conference with his partners. Lan entered, her heart hammering, but her eyes steady. The conference room glowed with light. Businessmen in polished suits chatting loudly. As Lan stepped in, heads turned, whispers spreading fast. Is that her? The waitress from the papers? My God, how dare she show up here? Victor Hale sat at the center, imposing, his silver hair slicked neatly back. When he saw Lan, he arched an eyebrow and let out a cold laugh. Well, the star of the hour, the little waitress who dared to defy Richard Gray. Lan took a step forward, her voice calm but firm. I came here to ask you one thing. Why are you using me to fight Richard? I'm not your pawn. The room erupted in mocking laughter. Victor leaned forward on the table, his eyes glinting sharp as blades. You're mistaken, girl. In this world, everyone is a pawn. The only question is, do you get to choose your move? Lan clenched her fists, her heart blazing. For the first time, she faced the man who had dragged her into the storm, and she knew, from this moment on, not just her dignity, but her very future was on the line. Victor Hale leaned back in his chair, a smug smile curling on his lips. He sipped his wine, looking at Lan the way a king might look at a jester. Lan, do you think you're special? You're just a penniless waitress. But thanks to me, your name is on every headline, every broadcast. That was a gift I gave you. The room erupted in laughter, echoing his words. Some even clapped, their mocking eyes burning into Lan. Her fists clenched tight, but she didn't tremble. Her voice rang out, sharp and steady. You're wrong. I don't need that kind of fame. I won't be remembered as your puppet. Victor's smile faltered for a brief moment before he burst into louder laughter, clapping as though she were entertainment. Good. Very good. You've got fire. But remember this, the world doesn't care about your kindness or sincerity. People only believe in power and money. And in this game, I have both. What do you have? Lan drew in a breath, her gaze locking with his. I have the truth. I have the trust of a child. And that's enough to keep me out of your control. The room went still. The laughter faded, replaced by a suffocating tension. Victor's teeth clenched, his smile gone. His voice dropped, sharp as steel. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life, Lan. From this moment on, I'll make sure the world sees you as nothing but a loser. And when that happens, not even Richard Gray will be able to save you. But Lan stood tall, her eyes blazing like fire. Then go ahead. Try me. The conference room grew heavier after Victor's threat. All eyes turned to Lan, some shaking their heads, thinking she had gone too far. Then, the doors burst open. The sharp sound of polished shoes echoed across the hall, silencing every voice. Richard Gray walked in. He wore a dark-tailored suit, his face stern, his eyes sharp as blades. His very presence shook the room. Victor arched a brow, smirking. Well, well. Richard Gray finally graces us with his presence. Richard didn't answer at first. He strode to the center of the room, his gaze brushing over Lan, firm yet protective. before stopping in front of Victor. His voice was calm, deep, but commanding. "Victor Hale, I should have known all these cheap tricks were yours." Victor chuckled dismissively. "Cheap tricks? No, Richard. This is strategy. And it seems your little waitress here has been quite useful to me." Lan clenched her fists, but Richard raised a hand slightly, signaling her to stay silent. His eyes locked on Victor. "You'd stoop so low as to use an innocent person just to get back at me." "Pathetic." Victor's smirk widened, his tone sharp with challenge. "In business, there's no such thing as innocent, only winners and losers, and this time, Richard, you'll be the loser." The room held its breath. Richard's eyes flashed with cold fire, a thin smile tugging at his lips. "We'll see who loses, Victor." Lan stood frozen between the two men, her heart pounding. In that moment, she realized this was no longer just her story. She was caught in the middle of a battle between giants, and her fate would turn with every move they made. The air in the conference room was taut as a wire. Richard and Victor faced each other like two predators ready to strike. Beside them, Lan felt as if she were balancing on a tightrope strung above a deep abyss. Victor let out a low laugh and signaled to his aide, who brought forward a leather case. He opened it, pulling out a thick file, and slammed it onto the table, making the room tremble. "Richard," Victor said, his voice booming, "you've always been proud of your spotless reputation, haven't you? Let's see what these photos have to say." One by one, he spread the pictures across the table. Lan's breath caught. They showed Richard in staged, compromising meetings with officials, suspicious bank statements, and printed emails hinting at market manipulation and shady deals. The room erupted in murmurs. Some businessmen even stepped back, their eyes narrowing with doubt as they turned toward Richard. Victor smirked triumphantly. "See? With just a snap of my fingers, I can turn your image of a model billionaire into a greedy, corrupt fraud. And the press out there will swallow this whole." Lan's chest tightened. She knew these were forgeries, just like the lawsuit Victor had conjured. But as the crowd's mood shifted toward him, dread gnawed at her. Yet Richard stood firm, utterly composed. His eyes were sharp as blades, locked on Victor. "Cheap tricks. I know your game. But you forget one thing, Victor. The truth always finds its way to the light." Victor laughed loudly, mockery dripping from every word. "Really? You think a waitress and a few weak excuses can stand against this mountain of evidence? Richard, this time you've already lost." Lan looked at Richard, then at Victor. In that moment, she realized this battle wasn't just about Richard's empire. It was about her own survival, too.